Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org. Edina Eye Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services and dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
And welcome back to Access to Democracy. Alan Miller with you, and co-hosting with Alan Miller is Steve Francisco. We are both here today, and we're really here because we are concerned, not that we want to see who's the hostess with the mostest, but we're really concerned about what has been proliferating as a Second Amendment argument and the gun insanity that is going on in this country and unfortunately taking so many lives. And what I want to do, and we'll kick it over to Steve in a second, but I want to read the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I can't emphasize that enough as my phone just went off in my pocket. But the Second Amendment, we hear everybody spewing Second Amendment, Second Amendment, Second Amendment, and the fact of the matter is most people don't know what is contained in the document. And certainly the most important language to me is a well-regulated militia. Now, the Supreme Court has taken it a step further and said everybody has a right to have a weapon in their home. They've taken it beyond militia. But the word regulated is really important, and it means regulations.
I've been having this ongoing discussion with friends of mine and friends in the legal profession for a long time about Second Amendment issues. And people, whenever you talk about reasonable regulation of firearms, things like background checks, making sure somebody isn't mentally ill and trying to possess or purchase a weapon, they say, well, you know, the Constitution, we have the Second Amendment. But the thing about it, Alan, that I don't think most people appreciate, and this is what I learned in law school and has been American law, none of these rights are absolute, including the Second Amendment.
Well, it's interesting you say that.
Now my phone's going off, I apologize.
That's probably both of us being contacted by the same person, if I had to take a guess. But in the 80s, there was a very famous case, District of Columbia versus Heller. Mm-hmm. And the late Justice Scalia, who was certainly in favor of guns and was a gun advocate, wrote in that decision, the majority decision, "Nothing in our opinion shall be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms."
Right.
Now, that's never mentioned when people talk Second Amendment, but the
Right.
fact of the matter is that is the prevailing Supreme Court opinion, and that is really what should control
Right.
all these Second Amendment discussions.
Some of the regulations that we've had that actually have been upheld by the federal courts, including, we've had a ban since the 1930s on possession of machine guns, for example. That came out of the gangster era, the 1930s. We've not, for a short time, from 1994 until 2004, I believe it was, we had a 10-year ban on so-called assault weapons, such as the AR-15 that was used in the Buffalo mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas, and also used literally just a few days ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So there are weapons that have been regulated and restricted and actually prohibited, and also states have had some latitude in this area where it didn't conflict with federal law to enact regulations.
Interestingly enough, New York yesterday passed a ban on assault weapons
Yep.
for anybody under 21. And in New York, you have to go through a background check even to have a pistol. I know I am a gun owner. I am a Second Amendment advocate. I think that people have the right to bear arms. And I was registered in New York. My pistols were registered in New York. When I moved to Minnesota 25 years ago, in a briefcase, I showed up at the police station, opened it up, all my pistols were in there, and they said, what's this for? And I said, I want to register them. And I was, you don't have to register them here. Are you going to do anything other than keep them in the home? And I said, no. You don't have to register them here. I think everybody should have to register a gun.
Right. Minnesota, by the way, our state, the state law requires that if you want to purchase a handgun, you have to get a permit to purchase the gun, and also they do a background check on you. But for an assault rifle, I believe that an 18-year-old can't buy an assault rifle without getting a special permit. And so there's presumably some background checks involved in granting those types of permits. But you know, we need to remember too, when we talk about the Second Amendment, and it is important. I mean, my family has owned guns too, long guns. We've used them for target practice up in northern Minnesota, shooting at cans and things. There's nothing wrong with that. The vast majority of people are law-abiding. But the problem we have, as we've just seen, we have this epidemic in our country, and I think there's nothing else you can call it but an epidemic of mass shootings and killings that are endangering all of us. Kids, I mean, school should be the safest place in the world for children 10 years old,
Well, you know,
and it's not.
We are a nation that is prone to overreact. After 9/11, we overreacted with the laws that we passed, some of which infringed on personal life. We have a tendency, for instance, even in vaccinations, somebody, and I won't mention Fox News or any of their
I think you just did.
broadcasters' names, but Tucker Carlson, question vaccinations immediately because he has a lot of followers. People then become anti-vaxxers. A lot of those people are dead. Why are they dead? Because they didn't really do what they should have done for their own lives and safety. It's the same thing with guns. We hear Second Amendment, and what amazes me is what comes out of the mouths of some of our Congress people who spew this out and really don't know what they're talking about.
I would say I think that's true, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about this issue, but just I would have thought after the shootings in Newtown that killed all these grade school children 10 years ago, in Connecticut, you would have expected that the country would have reacted and taken steps. And what I hear a lot of the opponents of any kind of regulation say, they often say, well, you're never going to enact new laws that will prevent all gun violence. That's probably true, but I would also hasten to add, we have laws against murder. That doesn't prevent people from committing all murders. We have laws against kidnapping and robbing banks. People kidnap and they rob banks. But you need to have a legal structure in place that tries to reduce the possibility of people, innocent people, being killed by these weapons. Really, the AR-15 and that type of assault weapon that can fire up to 100 rounds a minute, that's not for hunting. These are weapons of war.
It's a weapon of war.
And they belong with soldiers, not with an 18-year-old who may have mental health issues.
Or a 40-year-old who may,
That's right.
who may or may not have.
Or in Buffalo, a young man who had virulent anti-racist views and acted on that with an assault weapon. It's very disturbing.
Where did he get those views? From social media, online. Filled him full of really hate, misplaced. And where is he today? He was shot down, as so many of these killers either commit suicide or are shot down. It just boggles the mind. Yet you look at Australia. They had a mass killing a decade or so ago. They banned AR-15s, that type of weapon. They haven't had any since.
Right.
New Zealand had the same situation. With about 52 people were innocent people were killed.
Right.
They banned assault weapons. They haven't had that situation.
And just this week, the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, announced that he's going to ask the Canadian Parliament to enact legislation, a buyback program for certain types of weapons, and moving basically to limit handguns. Now, granted, people will always say, well, that's Canada, that's New Zealand, that's Australia. They don't have a Second Amendment. That's true, but this, again, back to this concept, the Second Amendment is not absolute. You know, there's a great quote from that's attributed to Abraham Lincoln, but it's also used in an opinion in the 40s by Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson. And they said that the Constitution, our Constitution, it's not a suicide pact. And the idea that that expresses is we have to balance our constitutional rights with our responsibilities to protect people's safety. That's why we have law.
And the Second Amendment is 231 years old. 231 years old, you put your musket, if you had it, in your Tesla, your electric car? I don't think so.
It took a long while to load a musket, as I understand it. You had to put the gunpowder in the barrel and then the ball, and you know.
And you got one shot.
And now we're talking about weapons, as I said earlier, that can fire 100 rounds a minute. I mean, this is madness, the path that we're on right now. And something has to be done. And unfortunately, we have a situation in our Congress where the National Rifle Association and a number of organizations are unalterably opposed to doing anything, even though polling shows 80 to 90% of the American people support reasonable regulation like background checks, closing the gun show loophole, red flag laws.
Start with red flag laws.
Yeah, what this is the idea that when a person is found to be mentally ill or disturbed or has certain criminal offenses in their past, in their record, domestic violence.
Especially domestic violence.
That a
happens
judge,
in so many cases.
Right, that a judge can issue an order to seize that person's guns and prevent them from being in possession of them. That's something that I think most people understand. You know, the people who respond to these mass shootings and say, well, it's a mental health problem, many times it is. And so the way you deal with that is to put a law in place such as red flag laws that allow judges to stop people from legally getting possession of these types of weapons.
Now, 4 days ago, there was a killing in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A man who was operated on only a month ago for a back pain or for a back issue felt that he had an uncommon amount of pain and his doctor didn't do anything about it. He went out to a gun store, bought an AR-15 on his way to the doctor's office, went into the doctor's office, killed not only that doctor, another doctor who was working there, a receptionist, and a patient who was waiting in the waiting room. Talk
4
about
people, and then he killed himself, apparently.
Talk about
Yeah.
insanity. Well,
Yeah.
the loss of that person who pulled the trigger, I don't bemoan.
Right.
But
But by the way, he purchased that weapon. The news accounts are that he literally purchased it 3 hours before he used it to kill these 4 other people.
I say on the way to the hospital.
It begs
Yeah.
the question, why don't we have, for certain types of weapons, why don't we have a reasonable waiting period in place that you can't just go instantly purchase an AR-15, that there should be a waiting period, that they conduct a thorough criminal background check on somebody to make sure that they should be authorized to have possession or purchase that type of weapon. That wasn't done because it wasn't required.
I remember during the first Obama election, one of the calling points against Obama, he's going to take away your weapons.
Right.
Hello, here we are in 2022, and Obama didn't take away your weapons in 2 terms.
Right.
And Biden certainly made it very clear, as a matter of fact, he spoke last night, that he is not against people having weapons. He talks about his family's history, where they had weapons,
Right.
and where they went hunting, things like that. And certainly,
But reasonable regulations, I think that's the key thing we need to think about in going forward in this debate about any changes in gun laws. What is reasonable? What commands the support of most of the American people? In the polling I've seen, it's not even close. That things like the red flag law, thorough background checks, closing the background check, there's a loophole on private sales and gun show sales.
And gun show sales.
Who does that
absolutely.
work for? That works for the advantage of the weapons manufacturers and presumably the person selling the weapon, but that's an extra step that should be taken. That's reasonable.
And the fact of the matter is that the NRA, which had 4.5 million members several years ago, is in all sorts of chaos, and their membership has dropped. But that's still, even at 4.5 million in a country of 330 million, should that 4 million control the gun laws? No, but who is controlling the NRA? It's the manufacturers of weapons and the money that they give to politicians, the unbelievable amounts of money that they are giving to politicians. There's something drastically wrong with that.
I agree, and I think you can't divorce the idea of the NRA's prolific contributions to certain members of Congress from how they see these issues, opposing even reasonable efforts at regulation. Now, one could say, without being all gloom and doom, that there might be a little sliver of hope here. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Democrat from Connecticut, since the shooting in Buffalo, New York, actually before all of this, after Newtown, he has been trying to talk to people across the aisle in the Republican Party, and he's presumably brought together a small group of Republicans, including John Cornyn of Texas, who are having discussions now about what might they be able to do to bring a bill to the floor of the Senate. And we'll see where that goes.
Unfortunately, I will believe it when I see it, because
I
after
think
every
so,
one
too.
of these tragedies, we say, well, after this, certainly we're going to get some kind of
Right.
logical, good sense restrictions. And I mean, in New York, they have registration. You have to have your weapon registered. I'm not against that. A lot of people are against that because they feel that that'll give the government an in to come and seize their weapons. The paranoia of the gun owners. And I don't see that way. If you have nothing to hide,
Yeah. I'm just struck by, and I saw this information online too, that the 18-year-old shooter in Uvalde, Texas, who killed, 21 people, 19 students, 2 teachers in that elementary school there. In the state of Texas, he was 18 years old. He could not legally buy a bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey, but he could go out, as he did on right near his 18th birthday, and purchase an AR-15 assault rifle.
Correct.
Which he used to murder 21 people. There's something wrong with this picture fundamentally that he was able to do that. Now, I do hear people come back and they say, well, you know, at 18 you're an adult in most states, and you should be able to do whatever you want, including purchasing these weapons. They say that 18-year-olds can go in the military. That's true, but as the president pointed out in his remarks to the country last night, those 18-year-olds who are using assault weapons in the military, they're being trained by gun experts. They're being trained in a controlled situation, strictly trained on the use of those weapons. It's not just an open bazaar where you can go buy any weapon you want. And unfortunately, that's the predicament we're in now, where all of us are endangered.
Even here in the city of Egan, there is a citizens academy run by the police department. Right. And one of the aspects of training, of the 8 weeks of training, is the possession and use of weapons. And you are taught the safe use of weapons, and on the last day you're taken to the range and actually get a chance to use both long gun and Glock pistol.
Right.
And it's invaluable. The fact that more people don't take advantage of it is overwhelming to me. This is the type of thing that we need. I don't want, for instance, my grandchildren to have to be afraid to go to school. And I just heard a story today about a 6-year-old who said, "Mommy, when are they going to come to my school?" And I mean, it is because she sees television, she watches television, she sees
But
her
no
peers.
child should ever have to ask their parent that question. No child, anywhere.
See, I'm old enough to remember that we had to hide under desks because of the fact that there was perhaps going to be a nuclear war.
Right.
Like,
I remember that too.
my desk would really
As if
have
that was going to offer you much protection.
would shield me from what?
Yeah.
But to have kids fear today, to have schools have to be locked today, the Republicans are saying 2 things. Ted Cruz, who has got to go down as the moron of the month in my estimation, said, well, you should have only one door access to schools, and there should be an armed person at the door. Well, I can see 4,000 kids lining up in the morning to go through one access door. Mm-hmm. It's ludicrous. The other thing that the Republicans are saying right now is that it's a mental health problem. Yes, even if it is a mental health problem, putting the guns in the hands of people who have mental health problems is a bigger problem than if they couldn't get their hands on the guns. It would cut the amount of slaughter down.
I would point out in Texas, where the Uvalde massacre happened at a school, Governor Abbott was very quick to say, well, you know, we have to devote a lot more resources to mental health. That's probably true, but I would hasten to point out they looked at how much money is spent by state governments on mental health treatment for people and mental health programs.
Per capita,
and
yes.
Texas ranked dead last. They were 50th out of the 50th states. So I would say, Governor, put your money where your mouth is. If you're going to talk about doing more for mental health, then you don't turn around and cut funding for those programs and limit the ability of us to help identify people who need mental health treatment.
On top of that, Governor Abbott cut $250,000 from his mental health budget this year. Talk about hypocrisy. And I believe he used the money to send busloads of people to the Capitol
On another issue, to protest immigration policy.
The United States Capitol.
Right.
So taking the mental health money and using it in a protest like that is another ludicrous example of ignorance.
Yeah. I think the political reality is some of the things that many of us would like to see. I frankly think personally that assault weapons should be limited to the military because that's what they are, as weapons of war. But the reasonable regulations, there ought to be some common ground where Democrats and Republicans ought to be able to come together on some sensible solutions. And I'm afraid to say it's really probably not going to happen until the voters, the people, get the last word on this. If they keep electing people to Congress who want to sweep it under the rug and do nothing, nothing will change.
That is the answer. People have to register, people have to vote, people have to be responsible, not only for themselves, but for their communities and for the safety of others. And it can only be changed at the ballot box.
I think Americans, as Americans, we have a lot of freedom. We're the freest people in the world in many ways. But I think with freedom, we need to acknowledge there are responsibilities that come with that freedom too. There always have been. That we not only look out for ourselves and our families, we live in a community and a nation. We have to look out for each other too. And that means coming to some middle ground and doing what needs to be done on issues like guns and gun crimes.
And the fact of the matter is that until we do that, we're going to be repeating programs like this again and again and again, with the carnage of innocent people, of innocent children, and
nobody's safe because these things can happen, as we've seen, anywhere. We've had mass shootings in Minnesota at Rocori High School, at Red Lake a few years ago, so we really have to take this seriously.
You know, an inmate escaped in Texas last week, a dangerous inmate. Well, he showed up yesterday and stole a car from a couple who were at their vacation home. He had an AR-15. He killed that couple and their 3 children. Fortunately, he was killed in a gunfight last night. But it's just a further example of the aggravation and the needless terror that is caused by really failing to do the simplest thing. And you've been talking with Steve Francisco and Alan Miller, who are venting their spleen, really, because we are really concerned citizens, not only hosts of access to democracy, but people who care for you, for your children, for your families, and who want safety for all of us in what is the greatest country in the world. But it still needs...
But needs some work.
It needs some work, and it needs really compassion and a lot of thought. Steve, thank you.
Thank you, Alan.